Hey guys, thank you for joining us for another Men's Bible Brief. This is Pastor Autry. If you can, join us on Wednesday mornings. The info is on the screen. If not, we got you covered right here on YouTube. Well, let's go ahead and join the brief in progress. God bless you. What's up, guys? This is Pastor Autry, and boy, did we have a doozy of an open mic session today. Hey, if you missed it, you can catch it on the rewind on Saturday mornings. You want to jump into this one. Matter of fact, a couple of questions we got to do a special session on because they were so meaty. But this is where we really distill, guys, our faith. Too many Christians have a surface level of the faith. They're not thinking through the issues strategically and practically and how we're to live it out. The guys really chopped this one up, and I'm going to try to give you the Cliff Note versions if I can. There's only so much I can share on this medium, but guys, this was a good one. It really was. So if you can, check it out on the rewind. And so let me give you the Hump Day food for thought for today. And here it is. Stress comes from trying to do it all on your own. Peace comes from putting it all in God's hands. Boy, that is so true. But how many of you guys know, boy, that is hard to do. But there's something about if we can release it in God's hands, boy, we can sleep better. We have more peace, significantly less stress. And so let's jump in. I got 5 questions for you today. So let's jump into the first one. Why are people falling away from the church? That's a great question. There's a number of issues here. The pandemic didn't help, that's for sure. But really, the pandemic accelerated what was really happening. That's what all the church research says. We kind of knew in 2000 that people were going to start falling away by 2020, 2025, 2030. We kind of knew it was coming. So this is really not a surprise to a lot of church leaders. It's really a surprise more so to Christians. But there are a number of reasons. One, just the ease of online streaming and all the voices out there makes it much easier to sit at home. And one of my good friends, pastor, and many of them actually have said time and time again, boy, if I wasn't preaching, I'd sure be at home watching this on stream. And so the convenience has made it easier. To all the options. There's just so much more to sample other than Christianity. I came up at a time there just weren't that many options. If you wanted to find out, let's say, for example, about transcendental meditation, you had to go probably to the last row of the library somewhere in the back, and there may have been 3 or 4 books on it. But today, just a click, and you can find anything on TM if that's what you're interested in. It's just the options that are available. Probably one that no one wants to talk about, the scriptures itself, and somebody brought this up in the conversation, the scriptures itself talks about a falling away. And throughout church history, there have been significant falling aways that has happened. And I think we're seeing that now where people just don't want the truth. It's the kind of thing you jump in and you feel like, oh, well, this is not what I was looking for, and you jump out. And I think that's the reality for some people. They thought they wanted Christ, and truth is their hearts were really not open, and that's just not what they want. That is a real issue. I think you cannot take away the fact that we're in a culture of anti-institutionalism, and many times for good reason. Sometimes the church has just not loved people well, and people have left the church for that reason. So there are a plethora of reasons why it's happening, and I think more than anything in times like these, the church needs to listen versus dictate and direct what people should do. We got to do a better job of listening that we might empathize and understand rather than to quote a scripture or to preach a sermon. So I think that was a great question. And we tried to chop it up as best we can. Number 2, and this is really kind of a hybrid of the first question, is fellowship the problem with people falling away from the church? And I would say probably yes. The truth is, we don't want to admit it, there's just a lot of things in church we can't talk about and we don't talk about. It's just taboo. We don't say it, but it's an unspoken rule. And the truth is, a lot of people, particularly the younger generations, they just feel like they can talk about anything in different spaces other than the church. That's just the truth. I think there's a truth too that where people feel more comfortable with friends in a bar around a few whiskeys or drinks than they do around Christians around the word. There's just a truth to that. And for whatever reason, Christians are unwilling to adapt to allow people to come as they are, even though I think this was the dominant trait of Jesus's ministry. As much as he stood for an incredibly high standard of purity, the people that we would call unpure or even impure or street felt extremely comfortable around Jesus. They were allowed to be themselves, and somehow, some way, being around Jesus, they were transformed to be more like him without Jesus demanding the transformation. Because the truth is, transformation that is human-centered never sustains itself. True transformation of the heart has to be spirit-led and God-centered. And many times we're trying to give people a human-centered transformational experience, and it doesn't work. It may last for a week. It may even last for a year. But in time, it will crack and people will see through it as artificial. So I think we're in a day where the Spirit of God is forcing us to be more spirit-led and God-centered in our transformational experiences and in our fellowship. And the truth is, people feel more comfortable with their friends at a game, feel more comfortable with their friends on a beach drinking a Corona than they do at a church. And that's something that the church has to address. This question was interesting. Why are parents unmoved in their discipline? And just the whole issue of discipline came up and how the harshness sometimes of religious doctrine became a part of parental discipline, and many times how parents will use traditional means and methods. And I've actually preached on this for years, and I've had people really clap back on me and say, hey, well, that's how my mom raised me. That's how I'm going to raise my child. And it's not an issue that somehow we're being unbiblical or unchristian when we're suggesting to parents that, hey, you need to think about different ways of raising your kids if it accomplishes the same goals. I can say first and foremost, my parents didn't spare the rod. When I got in trouble, I got in trouble. I don't think they abused me. I want to be very clear on that. I think maybe some people today would think of that as abuse. I definitely didn't think that was abuse. But it worked for me. I'm not going to say that I didn't have anger issues. I don't know if it's connected to that. It may be. It's quite possible. I don't know. But I'm just being forthright right now. The truth is, I think there are many in my generation that would say they were raised a certain way and it actually made them a better person. And I will always believe there's a sense that somehow trial, challenge, and discipline makes us better people. The scriptures even talks about how God will discipline us, meaning he will let us go through trouble because the trouble has a way of making us stronger, and it does. To the contrary, or conversely speaking, we do have to be careful with this younger generation because they just don't respond the same way as we do. They're different. They're far more sensitive. They have far more challenges. I think it's far more difficult for kids to navigate today's culture than we had it. I don't care what anybody says on that. And I just think my generation doesn't take that into consideration. Yes, I'm much less judgmental of this generation because I can't imagine if I was raised in this generation where I would have landed. Just the exposure alone of what they have access to would have taken me down years ago. And I can just pray. And so here, I just think we have to be careful as parents to listen. Surely you should have structure. You should have rules. You should have guidelines. There should be consequences. I think you should rethink, though, what those consequences really look like and look for the effective consequences that may be better served than the traditional consequences. The other side that we don't want to talk about in the Black community also, too, is the issue of slavery and Jim Crow. Many times our discipline in the past was discipline out of fear. The idea being, if I discipline you hard at home in terms of respecting your elders, when you're out in the town where I can't see you, you won't say something disrespectful to a white person. That was a very real issue. And many times the younger generation is just completely clueless to how dangerous it was to be black pre-60s, pre-70s. It was extremely dangerous. African Americans lived in incredible terror, had been traumatized in ways you can't imagine, from lynchings to beatings to threats, you name it. That was a real issue. And I think many times we did discipline out of trauma. I would also add, too, that the slavery, the trauma that continues to come from generation to generation, comes all the way from slavery. And this has actually been proven scientifically, that even the trauma of the Holocaust continues to haunt current Jewish families who have never even been to Germany. But because their grandparents were part of the Holocaust, that trauma actually affects them. It's just a real issue. And I think that's true as well, that many times in slavery, that was such a brutal experience. Somehow in our psyche, we think that somehow brutality or some kind of brutal form of discipline works. So we got to be careful here. We got to step back. And I'm always of the opinion, what works best for your child? What helps them become the person that you want them to be? Then use that method. And that ought to be the best method. That was a great, great question. The fourth question here, what is the role of politics in the church? And I think that's a fair question, because our culture has become so polarized because of the politicalization of everything. Everything is politicized. Even histories, even certain books. Now, we're talking about banning certain books, and surely I think there's some age-appropriate books that ought to be banned. I know there are highly sexual images and books that are being pushed in schools, but that doesn't mean you have to also ban history books. And so it's so politically charged today. And should a church be involved in politics? Let's just say a couple things. Number one, anyone who doesn't think the message of the gospel is not political really is an ostrich. They just are. They're just doing the ostrich thing. To say Jesus is Lord is to say that Jesus is the ruler of the world. And to say Jesus is Lord in that era of the scriptures in the ancient world was to say that, hey, Caesar ought to be removed as emperor. To say Jesus is Lord technically is to say that America or Biden shouldn't be president. And I made the point here, as a Christian, my allegiance will always be to the cross, not the flag. Love the country. I'm called to honor, respect the country, but I don't have to obey it if it causes me to disobey my Christian principles. I'm definitely not supposed to swear allegiance to it. And I know that's an issue for many people. Don't have an issue. You love America. I love America. I love the freedoms. Have no issue. But when I say Jesus is Lord, what I'm doing is I'm swearing my sole and absolute allegiance to Christ. The truth is, allegiance to America has hijacked our allegiance to Christianity. There is a sense that some people try to hold both at the same time, the flag and the cross. And then some people hold the flag above the cross. I never shall forget, I was walking our neighborhood and I saw a cross that was pretty much emblazoned in the red, white, and blue. And I think that's a symbol that, you see the flag, or that person sees America and the flag and the cross as synonymous. And I do not. My allegiance, as Paul says, is to the kingdom. My citizenship is in heaven. That's my first citizenship. I am thankful for the country that I am in. But my allegiance, first and foremost, is to the cross, the gospel. And I will swear allegiance to that first and foremost every time, why many times I am reluctant to pledge allegiance to America, because I'm not required to do that scripturally. I'm to honor, respect the laws, obey the laws, as long as it doesn't cause me to contravene my faith. But to swear allegiance to a country, to me, is in conflict with my allegiance to Christ. And that's just me. People may see that differently. Don't have an issue. That's fine. Politics. The black church has always been a church of justice. So the church by default, the black church by default, has been involved in politics to help people of color who have experienced marginalization, political corruption, and oppression or what have you, to come out of those spaces, to actually challenge America to live up to her creeds. And that's been a part of the black church's tradition since its inception. We were born in a place, the black church in the Brush Harbors, out of a place of oppression and injustice. And so this voice has always been a part of it. I personally do not try to push Christ community in one direction or another politically. Now, I'm sure by the message I've preached and the way I've preached, my political preference may kind of come out a little bit, but I'm not going to endorse a candidate. I'm not going to push a certain party above the other. I'm just not going to do that. Not intentionally. I'm just not. I just trust people to make up their own mind where they want to land politically. That's totally up to you. You can use the information. Now, we do have a social justice ministry that is charged with registering and getting people out to vote and educating people about the issues, educating people how the civic order works and how important that is. And I think that is my responsibility to make sure that as Christians and as African American Christians, that we are represented in a country that allows us to be represented. So I believe in that, but I'm not going to stand in a pulpit and endorse one candidate above another or one party above another. And again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that somehow every single message or every time I take the pulpit, somehow every single word that comes from my mouth is apolitical. I think just the nature of where we live, some political influence or innuendo is going to be a part of our language. It just is. That's what it is. So take it for whatever it's worth. That's where we are in terms of politics and church. And I think that's a great, great question. The last question, what about the push of transgenderism, a transgender agenda and other issues, and here the gay, LGBT, all these different issues? Where should the church stand? And boy, you talking about a place or a issue that is challenging the church. This is it. This is it. And I said this when we were talking about people leaving the church. I said one of the things the church is really struggling with is the issue of inclusivity. What does that look like? Because now you have a culture of people who look and think and are like you, but if they feel like their circle of inclusion does not include maybe a transgender friend or a gay friend, and they perceive that a church is not friendly to these two groups, they won't come to church on those two issues. That's another reason why people are falling away. What about those issues? And you know these are super hot topics religiously. And I think there are two issues, and there's a tension with them. One, I think there's definitely an agenda. There's a politicized approach that is directed toward Christians, that is designed to undermine Christians. I don't think every transgender person is trying to do that. I don't believe every gay person is trying to do that. But I think there is an agenda there that wants to do that, to undermine the underpinnings of Christianity. At the same time, and I'm not saying that everybody's doing that. I'm just saying there are certain groups within that. I think what happens when that happens, whether the church uses an agenda to push against it, or these groups use that agenda to push against the church, it's the people who get lost in the middle. As many individuals, and I shared the results of a report that was shared with me, that something like 3% of gay people really do not want to come into the church to change the traditional view of marriage. They just want to be a part of a fellowship and be accepted. And that's a stat that was sent to me, and I'll have to get the details on that and maybe post it in the description box. I'll have to chase it down. But my point is that regardless of the issues, these are people. That's my point. And the gospel calls me in a certain context to minister, and to love people. And I think the church has not figured that out. In some cases, I think the church doesn't want to figure it out. But I don't believe the gospel gives me any right to dehumanize or discredit the humanity of people, even if I might disagree with their practices. And that's kind of where the church is landing. We've really landed hard on the truth side without landing somewhere on the grace side, thinking that somehow I'm compromising my faith. Because sometimes there are, and I'm not going to say sometimes, many times, there are many innocent people that have a struggle underneath the skin that none of us have ever had. And we're speaking to something we have not experienced. And many times they're crying out for help. Many are committing suicide. And if that doesn't awaken our conscience as Christians, I don't know what it's going to take. That there's a way that we can navigate what we believe without pushing people to do self-harm. And I think there's an element within Christianity that says, look, I'm going to stand on what I believe and I don't care who it hurts. And I just can't go with that. I can hold a conviction and I can express a conviction in a certain way, but I don't have to express it in a way that causes harm or causes some kind of self-harm. Paul says we ought to speak the truth, but we ought to speak it in love. We ought to speak it in a way that at least wants people to retain and keep life. And that was a conversation I was actually in on Monday recently with some other pastors, and that's the challenge. And so these issues are not going anywhere. I don't think people should be treated as issues. I don't think they should be tolerated. I think for the most part, they're in a sense going through what African Americans have gone through. They were tolerated in this culture, yet the Constitution gives them full right. I don't have any issue with that under the Constitution. And I think as a church, and I would include my church, we're still wrestling with how do we accept people? How do we do this? How do we do this? And it is a very difficult, complex issue where we're still trying to figure out what it looks like. And people don't want to be figured out. They don't want to be treated as a project. They don't want to be tolerated. They just want to be treated like people. And I think at the end of the day, that is the challenge of the church more than anything. Just treat people like people. And I think you can't go wrong with that. Now, boy, I'm really giving you the cliff notes of this conversation, but I'm telling you, it was robust. It was good. People disagreed, which I think is healthy communication, healthy fellowship, that we can be disagreeable. We can disagree without being disagreeable. We don't have to break fellowship or anything like that, but we can share our opinions and just see it differently. And that's how we landed today. And it was a really, really good one. So if you can, it's on the screen. Check out that rewind, guys. You want to catch this. This was really, really a great open mic. God bless you, and I'll be looking for you in the next video. Take care.